One of my favorite James Clear quote is, "You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your habits." And isn't that true for podcasters? As we have a project that is sustainable, that is in the long term in our lives, it is important to find systems that actually work with our habits, that work with the goals that we have set, with the routines, with our personal lives, our business lives. And so I'm going to help you identify the reason why, even though you're creating podcasts using the same systems, the same tools, the same processes, why it feels harder. If you haven't met me, hi, I'm Monique Xavier. I'm the founder of the Podcast Space. And in these podcasts, I teach you about better ways to leverage your podcast. So let's dive into this week's episode of the Podcast Space. Okay, we are experiencing a big heat wave here in the UK. And let me tell you, this is no joke. I was thinking about recording the podcast episode in the flat, but it's just too hot and I can't do it. So look at me recording publicly in the park. So let's get into some of these first things. And as a podcast coach and strategist, one of the first things that I look with my clients is, are these systems still making sense for the types of goals that you have with your podcast? So a lot of people started as a hobby, and this is like the biggest one. If your podcast started as a hobby during the pandemic or pre-pandemic, you had a different lifestyle. I find that pre-pandemic, it felt like we had a ton more time. And so it just feels differently to create. So even though you're using the same system, it just feels different. Number two, you blindly followed a system that was done by a successful podcaster. So I often hear, again, I haven't taken her course, so it's not that I would know, and this is not my opinion, but a lot of people took Jenna Kutcher's podcast course, or for instance, Pat Flynn's. And a lot of people say, they were at the forefront of podcasting at the time. I wanted to follow what they were doing because they were successful. But at the same time, I always ask my clients, are you neurodivergent or are you a neurotypical creator? Because the way your brain works and operates, it will not work. There's kind of like some specifics that you will feel either bored by or frustrated about. And so in the beginning, you're like excited because you're like, oh, I'm going to, create content like just this successful person is. And then at the end of the day, it starts feeling really hard. And so it's because the format, like for instance, let's say creating a map for, 32 weeks feels really, really overwhelming and not exciting at all. And so as a neurodivergent creator, you may need to create content for quarters. Like that's what, for instance, I'm doing right now. I'm working with my clients to kind of like map out what their goals are to what we're talking about. And so also one of those things is like, I find that a lot of clients are following recipes and so much of the process, they don't enjoy it. And so if it is your podcast, why wouldn't you take time to actually find a system that you enjoy, that brings you, that challenges you in a way? Number three, is your personal or slash work time shrunk? You have more responsibilities. So for instance, a few clients that I work with, they had pets, and then they have kids, or they were child free and then they became parents. And so they're like really surprised. They're like, why does it feel so hard to create? I'm like, well, you either have like mom brain, or you just have more constraints around your time. For instance, you have to stop working at 3 to pick up your kids. People kind of underestimate how much that actually affects, and they're like surprised. They're like, what doesn't work? And I'm like, it's a completely different lifestyle. So I want you to actually put weight in some of these changes. Or for instance, if one of my clients, she was promoted while we were halfway through our work together, and so she had so many responsibilities, and the job changed so much that she really struggled to create. She was excited to create, but she couldn't find any time because mentally she would just be burnt out by the time that it was time to record. So we had to shift a few things around. So something to keep in mind. Now, number 4, you keep reinventing the wheel, and that is actually mentally exhausting. So you cannot feel excited and competent at something. And if you keep changing putting the kind of like the goalpost further and further away. To master a software, to master a system takes time. So no wonder you feel like you're actually exhausted by the time it's time to hit record, because you've just been playing around with the software, or maybe you are learning how to use the software. And so when it's time to market the podcast, you've just been so into the cut the scene here, paste there, add a visual element, and you're always trying new things. You're not following a template, and so it's mentally exhausting. Even though you have your system and you're using one tool, you're just trying to find, I guess, like you get a high out of trying things. That's what I sometimes find my clients are doing. They are so afraid of being bored that they just can't stop, air quotes, innovating. But the problem is, like, they're not innovating because it's bringing stress to their process. So I wouldn't say that that is a good thing. So if you recognize yourself, drop a hand in the comments on Spotify or on YouTube, because that is very common. And so we want to make sure that we have some consistency. And if we are trying new things, we're not reinventing the wheel every single week, because it just is not going to help you create a product that has consistent quality in the output. All right. Number 5, your system worked when you were podcasting as a hobbyist, but now that you're trying to treat it, or treating it like a business or a monetizable product, it's not working anymore. And that is because I identify those as kind of like elements, like clients trying to put the same effort as it was a hobby, and you can't. You just can't, because there's more condition there's more elements that will condition the output. There's just more needs to think about. There's a bigger need to think about different elements. And so if you're trying to grow your podcast, you may need to stretch yourself out of the ordinary of what you were just playing around, and now you have to send follow-up emails to guests and be strategic in the way that you talk to them in order to close business. Or let's say if you're trying to create awareness, like pitching your podcast to publications, it is a completely different ballgame when you're treating your podcast as a hobby and then to a business or a product. So just no wonder, even though you have your same systems, it's not going to work. All right, number 6, you're just bored and it doesn't challenge you anymore. I hear a lot of clients on the opposite side of the ones that are trying all the time new things. They just kept trying the same formula and they're like, well, it works. But the thing is, if you've been doing that for 3-4 years, you're likely a different person, and your business is probably different. Your life looks different. And so you should challenge yourself a little more. But the thing is, if you are doing week to week and you're not leaving enough time, it's really hard to make those decisions because you're just focused on the doing. So that's why I normally recommend thinking about some seasons where you need to create shorter podcast episodes, so that moving forward, you have more time and capacity. So for instance, like you can batch 3 or 4 episodes in one go, edit them, schedule them, or send them to your editor and they will schedule them. And then you will have time and mental bandwidth to strategically look at the content strategy for their week or for their quarter. All right. And then number 7, the last one, you're coming up with content initially was easier. And so everything else felt easier too. And I find that when clients were not strategic about what they were talking about, they would just like do whatever. Everything else felt exciting and fun. And because they're challenging themselves to be more strategic. So for instance, like talking about exclusively about their area of expertise in the podcast. And for instance, making sure that they have more thoughtful questions, or that the questions lead back to their products and services. That is going to create a lot more friction as you go through the process. And so in that sense, it's just going to make everything feel a little harder. And it's normal, right? We're up leveling. It just makes sense. All right, so that is it. These are kind of like the 7 different reasons why you may be experiencing harder times when you're creating a podcast, even though you have the same systems, processes, and tools. And so I want to challenge you to not be on autopilot, to not create things just for the sake of it, create content for the sake of it. Because yes, there's an algorithm on podcast platforms, there's an algorithm in social media platforms, but you don't need to create content just for the sake of being there. And so stop being on autopilot, and it's time to either set time aside to look at your content strategy or bring in an expert, whether it is to look at your formats on your show. Like, for instance, me, I would love to talk to you about what is working, what isn't working, look at your numbers, look at your systems, look at your processes, and figure out what worked great for that time in life and what needs to change so that it brings back that joy of the process to start giving you results so that you get excited again. All right, so I will invite you to look at the link in the show notes. I'll have links to everything where how you can work with me. You can visit thepodcastspace.com/podcast and then find this week's episode, which is episode 2 of season 5. And I definitely want to challenge you to get in touch and to think about how could we look into your content strategy to make it work. All right, I'll see you in the next episode, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.